Okay, welcome everyone. This is now the first part focusing more on these broader trends in voice technology. So why does it matter in the first place? So voice assistants are essentially not just a platform, or you could think of voice assistants also just as a piece of hardware, but they're actually combining two different things. They're combining a platform and they're also combining a user interface. So think for a moment about the way how the web emerged over the past 20 something years. So you could think about this along three different stages. The first stage was just having static websites. So we were essentially having a keyboard in front of you. You were using a mouse and you were navigating through a bunch of hyperlinks that connected different web pages to each other. So it's a very static way of interacting with content on the web. The second stage was the emergence of the mobile web. So now we had smartphones and we had different ways to also control these devices. So we had touch interactions, we had all sorts of gestures. And this allowed us to have both different types of content that we were able to access because we had a new way of interacting with content on the web, but also different kind of hardware and device to interact with the web, and specifically the emergence of the mobile web. And now a third wave is emerging. And I really like to talk about this as a third wave of the web because it's not just a different platform. So the Amazon Echo that you see depicted here on the image, but it's also a totally different kind of interface. So now we also have a different way of interacting with content that is on the web. And also we are taking some of the things away from us. So now we can't have our visual sense involved. We don't have to be connected to our keyboards and our mice. Now we have a different interface as well, because now we can naturally speak to these devices. So when you think about these fundamental changes going from, let's say, the first, I don't want to say simplistic, but the first phase of the web, having just hyperlinks connecting content, then we had the era of the mobile web, and now we enter the third big wave, focusing on the way how voice assistants are changing and leading us into a new kind of web. What is interesting to think about is that there is something that is almost like a platform wars. So when you think about the way how we think about dominance, you could think about this along four different A's that are depicted here. There's something about authority, there's something about access, there's something about acquisition, and something about attention that is managed on the web. And not just right now when we talk about voice assistants, also when you think over the past years and decades, what happened on the web. So think for a second what happens in terms of authority. What would you do when you want to know something that you don't know on the web? What would you do? You would Google it, exactly. So in terms of authority, what happens right now, the numbers are irrelevant here, the specific numbers, but there's one company that stands for accumulating the knowledge on the web, and that is Google. So when people think about, okay, I want to know something, they think about Googling it. So the company is essentially entering into a stage where it's the authority itself. And I mean, this is going on for years or over a decade, that Google is synonymous for authority when it's about understanding or getting to know something that you don't know and you want to Google it. Think about access to specific content now. So access to specific content, what would you do if you want to I don't know, just entertain yourself for a few minutes? You have 10 minutes left, you did your studying, and now you want to entertain yourself for a little bit. Well, what most people do, if it's about video content, you go to YouTube. Maybe you spend a little bit of time watching a documentary on Netflix. If it's on about podcasts and music listening, people will for sure do something on Spotify, maybe a few others, but clearly Spotify when it's about music, and YouTube when it's about just entertainment in video form. These big companies manage access to specific content on the web. That's a given. What would you do if you want to buy a new, let's say, I don't know, a new drill machine? Just had to buy something recently because I wanted to fix a few things in the house. So it's about acquisition. What are the platforms that you would go through? Well, obviously, it's Amazon, and maybe if you go a little bit broader, Alibaba. So these companies are dominating what is going to be provided on the web. And it's the interface itself or the platform itself when you want to buy a new product. And of course, many countries have sort of their own specialized platforms like Digitech and Galaxos and others here in Switzerland, for instance. But these big tech giants, they determine what is being sold and manage the entire sales funnel to the actual sales. Now, finally, attention. What do you think about managing attention on the web? So let me open this here right away. What I'd like to steer your attention toward. Think about the last few years, how the web has changed. And I talked initially about these three big stages, going from a more static web to a more mobile-driven web. The mobile-driven web was really about visual display. It was about visual display. Now also think about the different social media platforms, think about Instagram and others. But it was really about presenting images to people, going from a text-based face internet to having a very visually dominant internet. And now we have more and more very dynamic content. We have more and more video, we have more and more audio. And you see these also here in the numbers. I mean, the numbers are really changing dramatically. I mean, think about this for a second. People spend more than 4 hours just consuming video and audio content per day. That is crazy. But it's really fundamentally changing how people interact with the web through new types of technologies. So where is this leading us? It is leading us to what has been summarized in this article here in HBR as the 5 A's framework on generating dominance on the web. And specifically now, when we think about voice assistants, and the first two ones are clear in terms of authority and access, because we have these different hardware devices, and you also have them on your smartphone, which already channel what is provided to you. So some of these manufacturers are the authority, where, for example, you have an Amazon Echo in your home, or I'm using my Google Assistant on the smartphone. They channel specific access to specific content on the web. The second part is also obvious, so in terms of acquisition. So if you own an Amazon Alexa and you have your device standing in your home, and you will ask for buying a new pair of a drill, for instance, it's clear that what is recommended to you is something that is on Amazon.com. If I'm about to ask my Google Assistant for a drill, I'm receiving the first few search results. And try this for yourself. You're receiving the first few search results on the Google Assistant, and you will do exactly the same exercise with your Amazon Alexa. You will get to receive an offer for some of the top ranked products on Amazon.com, obviously. And it's also diverting attention away from other devices, obviously, because now when we have our specific hardware that we're interacting with, it also steers attention away from some of the other devices that you're using in your daily lives. And now you might be wondering, what is the fifth A in the equation here? Well, this is really all about agency. And agency, when you think about this psychologically, what psychologists define as agency, it's essentially, in a nutshell, it's your capacity to make self-directed decisions so that you are the one influencing something. So you have agency over your outcomes in life. So what happens right now in terms of agency is, I don't want to say that agency is given away to other market entities, but it's something clear when you combine authority, access, acquisition, and attention. It is to some extent changing our agency, because what is sourced to us is defined based on the kind of hardware that we own. Do we have an Amazon Alexa in our home, or do we have Google Home, for instance? So these things are fundamentally changing also our agency that we have when we make decisions. So it's important to think about authority, access, acquisition, attention, and how those four change the extent of agency that we have for our own decision making. So how does it change for brands, and you could also abstract a little bit more, how does it change the market dynamics for companies more broadly? Who will survive in a new world of conversational commerce? Well, think about the numbers here for a second. And these numbers are changing, obviously, but these are numbers specifically focusing on voice-based shopping. So already a quarter of people have been used a voice-activated assistant to shop something online. And 1/3 of those are using a specific device to do this, either a Google Home, as we have, for example, here in our place, or Amazon Echo. So 1/3 of these people who have used it for doing something on shopping have a specific hardware device to do this. And that is getting now very interesting because in the past, it was all about shelf space, all about getting the right space, for example, in a retail store. Now it's managing attention, and attention in the sense of how do we make sure that we get on top of the verbal searches. And you can do this for any kind of product that you might be interested in. For example, I don't know, I just did this recently, asking for the best coffee and doing this on different devices, and you get totally different results based on the kind of assistant that you're using. What is also clear is that this is not as big of a problem if you're already a really strong brand, and you might have already become synonymous with certain product categories. So if you're already a strong brand, and also as part of this, if you're a strong brand and you know already a lot about your customers, you're generally speaking in a stronger position because you already know what people are probably searching for. You already know the kind of things that people are Googling before they're getting into your product or into the kind of product options that you're selling. So voice-based shopping and conversational commerce is already here. It's not something that is totally beyond the boundaries of what retailers are thinking about. It is already there. People are using their voice assistant to search for product options. Some of them use specific hardware. Again, the number that you see also here on the screen, 8% are already using it on a very specific device. And the more history you have about understanding what your customers are searching for, the more and the better you're prepared to going into conversation commerce, obviously. So these are statistics that change over time. But I just wanted to share a few things to also get us thinking a little bit about how conversational commerce and how virtual assistants are already fundamentally changing how we access content on the web. So think about these numbers here for a second. 20% in 2016 were using Google searches through voice. So that's already a few years ago right now. So that probably has changed, but it was already 1/5 of people on the web using the Google app and using a voice-based command to access content on the web. So these numbers will have changed. You probably expect that these numbers have risen over the years, but to which extent? Well, these are numbers now already also a few years ago. So 2019, 58%, and again, take these numbers with a bit of caution. These numbers are always depending a little bit on the kind of source that you're accessing here. But it's already showing you that this has tripled almost over time, that 58% of online adults have used voice-based search, and almost 1/3 have used it monthly in 2019. So whatever the numbers are, it's clearly showing that these numbers have increased dramatically. People are much more comfortable to use voice-based interactions on a bunch of different devices, either on their phone or having a specific device to do this, as we just talked about before. Think about the way why people might be doing this. So there are a number of reasons, but one of the key points here to take into account is that people have a hands-free interaction. So everything that was very much driven by your visual perception, so you had to use your vision sense to access content on your mobile phone. You had to look at the screen. Now you can do whatever, and you say, Google, give me XYZ, or hey Google, what's the time right now? Hey Google, what's my next meeting? Hey Google, what is the best drilling machine below 100 Swiss francs, for instance? So whatever is driving change, one of the key dominant factors is that people are hands-free. So you don't need other senses to access content. It's also a reason for some people that it's faster. So instead of typing in a long phrase on the device, you get faster results. And typically, if you want to avoid very long phrases that you have to write down, and that's fundamentally changed. Also, some of the dynamics, even in our own house, for instance, my wife was often complaining that I'm fiddling around too much with my mobile phone, and I was often saying, "Well, I just want to change the loudness, for example, the volume here of our speaker." And now we both got into the habit to simply say, "Hey Google, lower the volume," or in German, "Hey Google, leise," "Hey Google, lauter." So we learned how to interact with our technology in our house simply by using a voice-based interface to our devices, which is also making another point. I briefly talked about hardware before. Also think about the fact that voice as an interface is not just restricted to the devices that we spoke about before, that we have a specific device like a Google Home Assistant, for example, as a specific device, or an Amazon Echo as a specific device. A voice-based interface is getting more and more in all kinds of appliances. So for example, if you have a soundbar, there's a very high chance that one of the newer models that you might own already has a voice assistant integrated, if you're using it or not. And later we also speak a little about the ethical implications of having a voice-based interface, essentially going through a lot of different appliance categories at the moment. So thinking about this a bit more broadly, what is also changing right now is that this is also entering a new era, if you will, of voice marketing. And voice marketing, if you want to have one definition, being the use of marketing strategies and tactics to reach a target audience through the use of voice-enabled digital devices. So a bunch of different definitions out there, but the one thing to think about is the fact that this is a new channel to reach consumers in markets. And the reasons are manifold, but one of the reasons are obviously because you want to build a different kind of connection to people. It's much more personal. I mean, when we speak, again, remember what we talked about in the beginning of the lecture. Speech is way less controlled. Writing is a very controlled activity. It's also much more formal. But when we speak, it's much more informal. It's less able to get revised, but it's also very unique to create a connection to someone. So it's a completely different level of interaction, obviously, when you get to know someone and you have the ability to speak to the person, as opposed to you making your first introduction by email or any kind of other written form. It's also already changing, as we talked before in the numbers, that people look up information now through a different interface. They're asking a voice assistant either on their smartphone or any kind of other device. So this is changing across the board, across the different age categories, as we also saw before. So what is happening as well is, this is something that is also provided in some of the readings that are shared with you. It's also changing how people think about these devices. So it doesn't matter if it's a specific dedicated hardware that they have in their house, or if it's just something that is essentially just a piece of software in your phone. It is leading to a different level of anthropomorphization, so that people tend to anthropomorphize the technology that they're using. So in the article that I shared with you, you will read that people talk about the voice assistant that they're using either as something like their best friend versus just a different piece of hardware or just a separate device. And that is something that you also see in the reviews that people are writing about these different devices, that some people create totally different kinds of interactions that are much more sociable as they have been in the past, where you just had, I don't know, you wouldn't be, I mean, you use your computer and your laptop a lot, and maybe some of you also have a tablet. So it's a very personal device when you think about it. But have you ever given your laptop a specific name? Or have treated it almost like a best friend. No, your laptop is probably just another piece of hardware to get a certain task done. You use it for writing an article or to browse stuff on the web. But now, as we have technology that becomes more and more human-like, people see voice assistant almost like a personified assistant and almost like a friend or companion. So that is also something that is expressed in another paper that is in the optional readings, where you see that the use of a voice assistant is also creating a different level of social presence. And social presence has been something that has been key to build trust, for instance. And it's something that has been studied specifically now in the context of voice-based interactions. And and social presence is also something that directly impacts the extent of trust that people experience. And also in some of the other optional readings, if you want to get to know a little bit more, we also wrote a paper about the fact that having more trust in some of these technologies, so specifically here in a conversational robo-advisor, so in the financial context, could lead also to bad outcomes for consumers, because when consumers are more trusting in a recommendation that they receive, but this recommendation may or may not be in the best interest of a consumer, and people then choose the recommendation that they receive, it could also lead to detrimental outcomes for consumers in the long term.